The Jets selected Olu Fashanu with the 11th overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. What kind of player is he? How has his family shaped him, and what can he bring to the team? Today I'm joined by Donnie Collins. Donnie has been covering Penn State football for the Scranton Times for over 2 decades. We're going to get all of our questions answered today on JetCast. Welcome to another episode of JetCast. As always, I'm Pat, and today I am joined by Donnie Collins. Donnie has been covering Penn State football for the Scranton Times for over 2 decades now. Donnie, tell us a little bit about how you got into, sports journalism a little bit.
Well, yeah, I was actually just telling this story to a group of kids at the elementary school the other day. I did a career fair, but yeah, it kind of picked me. I went to Penn State to be a meteorologist. That's a big meteorology school. And I ended up joining the Daily Collegian, the student newspaper there. It's one of the best student newspapers in the country. Ended up joining them only because my friends were. So I was kind of just jumping in there, and they were all sports writers, and I joined the sports writing staff. And long story short, that's exactly what I ended up doing because I loved it. And I loved just being around sports. I loved, analyzing. I loved the statistical part of it. And, when it came to college football, I had never, even at Penn State, I had never covered college football. That was something I picked up when I was hired in Scranton. So the last 20 years I've been covering Penn State, and obviously a lot of ups and downs with the program through that point, coaching changes, a lot, the scandal, everything. But it's one of the things I enjoy most is seeing a player like Olu Fashanu or a Micah Parsons or Saquon Barkley kind of transition from the college game where they physically can dominate it to the NFL, where everybody's kind of physically on the same level. There are certain players who are above others, obviously, but those guys are guys who you look and see how are they going to transition when the guy across from them is equally as good as them. And it's always an interesting thing to me. That's what kind of keeps me going in this 20 years and counting moving forward, because I just love the unknown part of it, and college football. I'm more of a baseball guy myself, but college football with the unknown is way more of an interesting kind of thing for me to cover and write about, and that's why I've kind of been around college football for as long as I have.
So tell us about Olu. When did he kind of first get on either your radar or other writers' radar at Penn State? He was a redshirt freshman, if I'm not mistaken. So, when did you first realize or start talking about him?
Okay, so Olu was a big time prospect out of he went to a Gonzaga high school in Maryland. I believe it's in Maryland. It was a while ago. So we cover recruiting a lot. He was one of the big prospects in the I would guess it's the 2020 recruiting class. But he didn't play his first year, and he didn't really play his second year as a redshirt freshman until the Outback Bowl when they played Arkansas. And it was kind of I think it's a game most Penn State fans would say they'd like to forget. They didn't play very well in that game. It was the end of a really rough season for them. I think they won 7 games. It just wasn't the kind of year that they were hoping to have. And they go down to Tampa, and on New Year's Day, they just lay an egg in the second half against Arkansas, and Arkansas just pushes them around and out physicals them and all of that. But the one great thing that came out of that game for Penn State was Olu's first start, and really his first significant action, and he dominated. And it was kind of crazy because after the game, we're all kind of gathered around, eating dinner wherever we went that night and thinking, why weren't they playing this guy? This guy is a tremendous player. It looked like his form was great. His footwork was really good. Didn't allow a sack. He was dominant in the run game. So it didn't make much sense that they hadn't played him yet. So he was clearly going into 2022 as a bona fide starter, and he dominated that year. Didn't allow a sack. And if you remember after the season, Olu was really talked about as a top 10 pick because he could have come out. He could have come out into the draft after the 2022 season, but he came back, and that surprised a lot of us. We didn't think he would turn down top 10, top 15 money, which is where all the quote unquote draft analysts were saying he would go. So him coming back last year was pretty surprising, and they had national championship hopes last year. They didn't beat Ohio State and they didn't beat Michigan again, which is really the story of this program right now. They haven't gotten past those two teams, but Olu played really well again last year, and I think you see the analysts say, well, he hasn't given up a sack in 2 years, or he gave up one, or whatever it is. I think he gave up one, if I'm going to be honest, but one sack in 2 years is pretty good. And he's been really on the radar though since his recruiting days, because I would guess in a really good recruiting class for Penn State, he was one of their top 5 guys. I think he was a 4-star recruit, for whatever that means, and in the college game anymore. It seems like everybody is a 4-star recruit, but Olu was a legitimately really good prospect along the offensive line, and they loved him the minute he got on campus, but they took their time with him, and I think that paid off, and I think it'll pay off for him in the NFL too. He really he's going to need that adjustment period, and the other thing with Olu is he's young for his age, so yeah, I think he graduated early. I think he was 17 when he graduated and showed up at Penn State. So they really gave him the time he needed to kind of get his feet wet. But once he got in there, he was as good as you could ever want to be as a left tackle at the major college level.
Anybody that you talk to about Olu says he's got a good head on his shoulders. He's got a good family base. And, you mentioned that obviously he went back to school to finish his degree. He didn't come out as a junior, which I think says volumes for the type of upbringing that he had. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Can you tell me, what kind of upbringing he had, and, what his family kind of means to him?
Yeah, and you said it best right there. I mean, you said it better than I'm going to say it. He came back to school when he didn't have to. He turned down millions to come back.
Still got millions.
He still got it.
Yeah,
but that's never a guarantee. And
yeah,
I think you see way more often than not the college game. They leave as soon as they know they've got the money in the bag. They head out. But and we as reporters, we have a pretty good finger on the pulse of the team. Mm-hmm. And when he came back, it surprised us, because we just assumed he would go. There was no reason for him developmentally to stay. I mean, other than number one, he was young. Number two, he only had the one season where he actually played a lot. But the money was in the bag again. But the education to the Fashanus is important, and Penn State was important to them. He kind of reminds me of an old school Penn State player. He would have fit in the 80s and 90s when Joe Paterno was there, and the focus was always publicly academics, get your degree, and then whatever happens in football, but make sure you get the degree. And they do whatever they can to make sure you get it. And Olu wanted the degree, so you can't fault him for it. I mean, even if he got hurt, he had what he went to college to get. He didn't come in with any pretenses that he was going to be a top 10 pick. He just didn't. If it happened, great. But he came in with his head down. He came in with goals to graduate, goals to become better as a football player, in that order, and he accomplished them. And you mentioned he has a good head on his shoulders. He really does. He was every bit a captain on that team. There was, I said I have a baseball background, so I've also covered AAA baseball. I covered Aaron Judge when he came through Scranton. He reminds me a lot of Aaron Judge. Just the way the teammates around him. He was a very quiet guy, but teammates around him, if Olu spoke, they were listening. And there's a lot of great players on that Penn State team the last 2 years who listened to Olu. And even a guy, as a redshirt sophomore who was playing in his first year, when Olu spoke, it meant something. So nobody wanted to disappoint the man. So he was a really steady presence for them at the college level, when it's looking more and more these days like a professional game at a lower level. Olu was a true college player in the sense that he wanted that education. He had goals. He worked hard in two different ways. And he graduated early from Penn State. He had the degree, and he did a really fine job as a student as well as a player. And there's no red flags about him in any regard as a person. He is a tremendous person.
You answered my next question. I was going to ask, how is he viewed by his teammates?
Yeah.
Him being a leader in that locker room, I think is going to, from my perspective, from the Jets' perspective, is exactly what they need, because they're coming from a situation where they had someone who was supposed to be the anchor at left tackle, who, was not viewed very well
Mhm.
by his teammates, not only from a personal standpoint, but from a play standpoint, if we're being honest. What is Olu's strengths as a football player?
His technique is really, really good, and it was immediately, like, even dating back to that Outback Bowl. That's what stood out to me. His technique was impeccable. His footwork was on point, and I think that's important for a tackle. I mean, you could look
Yep,
at you
absolutely.
could look at the Jet, where the Jets are picking. But let's look at number 11 at that point. Let's look at that. I mean, they could have taken Amarius Mims, who's a much bigger, more physically imposing guy. Not that Olu isn't. He's 6'6" to 320 or whatever he is. But
Mhm.
Amarius Mims is a much bigger guy. J.C. Latham, a guy who is, he's physically dominant. You
Latham
look
was
at
off the
his,
board though at that
like, almost
point.
off the, okay. Well,
Yep.
we can cross that one out. Who's the other guy I'm thinking of then? Not Latham.
Oh, I can't think. Joe Alt was already off the board
Alt was
too.
off. Alt and Latham were the two.
Yep. So it was really
Okay.
him, or it was Fuaga, really, when
Yeah,
it came down
or
to.
Fotanu, or one of those
Yep.
guys. But yeah, I mean, you're going to look at those guys, Fuaga and Fotanu and whoever,
Mhm.
and see on their film, they're going to be pancaking guys. They're going to be physically dominant, but they're not as consistent as Olu because their technique wasn't as consistent as Olu's. It just wasn't. Right. I had Olu as my number one guy among the tackles, and I didn't do that lightly. I just think that he's put two good seasons together, and Alt didn't do that. Alt was he put a dominant last season together, but he was kind of up and down. And I do watch a lot of Notre Dame, so I knew Alt was up and down. And you can't fault Alt. He's physically what you want, number one. Number two, he's got the bloodlines. So I understand that one. But when you look at Olu, it's the projection. What can he be? He's the youngest of those guys, number one. He's probably the best technique-wise of those guys, number two. So what do you project him to be down the road? And I thought the Saints were a really good. I think everyone thought the Saints were the team that were going to take him at number 12, but he was going to have to go in and play immediately. And I didn't know immediately, because he's not. He could get stronger. Olu could get a lot stronger, and I think he will. But you look at putting him in there immediately. Yeah, I think there's going to be some growing pains, but the Jet situation is perfect for him. And in defense of, it was Becton you were talking about earlier, right?
Yep.
Okay, so if Becton goes in, he has to be the starter. And I think there was a lot more questions about Becton.
I think you could make an argument, if Becton's still on the team, Olu's starting, just because of how poor Becton was playing. But what sort of weaknesses are there in his game that he can improve upon by sitting behind Tyron Smith?
Yeah, I don't know if weaknesses is the word, because I always like for a first round pick to come in and sit a bit. I'm a Steelers fan, so I watch them a lot, and they have a tendency to. They did it last year with Broderick Jones. They didn't play him immediately, even though he was by far more physically talented than Chuks Okorafor or even Dan Moore. They didn't put him in there immediately. They let him learn behind those guys, and then when the time was right, they put him in. So I think there's a lot to learn about how you go about your business, number one, especially from a guy like Smith. He's one of the best when he's healthy. So I think that's how to be a professional, how to kind of approach day to day in the NFL, because it is a lot different than college. So a guy like Olu is going to absorb that and become better just by watching a true professional ahead of him. So
especially with rookies, there's not a lot of off season there between the end of the college season, the draft, and then you're right into like rookie mini camp. They don't have a lot of time there in between to have really an off season, I feel like. For rookies, it's even harder. So I'm happy that he's going to be able to sit for a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's the best situation for him. It's the best situation for anybody, but he's going to benefit from it. And you make a good point, because these college players, you have to understand how their head is spinning at this point. Olu in December is deciding, am I going to play the bowl game? Am I playing in the Peach Bowl? He decided not to, but he's training that month. He's taking his finals that month. He's doing all that. Then he gets out and he's full on training. He's at the combine in February. He's working out in April in March doing his pro day. April's the draft, mini camp now. There is no time really to process this jump. So to have that time for the Jets to be able to give that to him, I think is going to be huge for him, because any kind of extra information he has is going to benefit, because that's what he had at Penn State. He worked behind a couple of veterans at Penn State and really was able to kind of learn from them. And some guys can't do it. I mean, Penn State's had guys who sitting behind better players at that point who just didn't understand and didn't get it. And I'm not sure they got better because of that, but Olu certainly did. And I think he's smart enough to know that if he's sitting behind a Pro Bowl kind of player, an all pro kind of player, really, then he's going to be, he's going to benefit from that. And he's going to go about the business of learning the game from Tyron Smith.
The storyline of the Jets offensive line, really the team as a whole, when we get into it, but the offensive line was health. It was just a revolving door of tackles and guards coming in, trying to fill holes, and there was no continuity. From a health standpoint, how is Olu? Is he a guy that's going to stay healthy? Is there any sort of injury concerns that you can think of?
Well, I mean, you can't predict that,
right?
There's been so many players.
His history throughout college.
There's been no history of injury. I haven't. Well, actually, that's not exactly the case. He got hurt at the end of 2022 and missed the last month, but he came back last year and there was no injury concern last year. He played pretty much every meaningful down. He actually did play every meaningful down for Penn State last year, but they kind of kept him out. I think some of that is a precaution. He could have. The rumor was at the time he could have played the Rose Bowl in 2023 after the 22 season, but they held him out as a precaution. And at that point, he had already said he was coming back. So there was, if you want to play him, yeah, I guess you could if you're Penn State, but they didn't. Just kind of held him out. It was he got hurt in the Ohio State game at the end, and Penn State's really careful with injuries. They don't risk it if there's any kind of potential to get hurt worse. So they kind of held him out of November. But I think I have not heard anybody mention that's a red flag of any kind. I'm pretty sure it was a knee injury, but they don't announce what it is. But he kind of was putting that to bed all last year because he played against the top competition in the country and he played every down. So I would say he's 100% healthy coming into minicamp, unless there's something that happened since that I don't know about. But there's nobody at Penn State was worried about any kind of injury concerns with Olu once he got to the NFL. And frame wise, like I said, he can get stronger. He will. He kind of looked a little skinny in pads at times. Up close to him, he is a monster physically. So I think if he gets any bigger and stronger, he's going to be he's going to look like a player who's pretty injury resistant. But that said, I mean, they've had a million guys who went through their entire college career uninjured. Kajana Carter many years ago was one of the most durable backs in the nation in college, and got hurt on his in his second game with the Bengals in preseason, and was never the same player after that. So you don't know, but I don't think there's, unless something happens, there's nothing lingering with Olu.
I absolutely loved the pick. I know there were a lot of Jet fans out there that wanted Brock Bowers at the time, but my position has always been that the easiest way or the most straight line path to success this season and possibly winning a championship is to keep Aaron Rodgers upright. And I always felt that while Tyron Smith is a Hall of Famer, you can't trust that he's going to be there the whole season. I think Olu will absolutely play this year. And going forward, I think he could be the next DeBrickashaw Ferguson, the next tackle for the decade for this team. What do you project him out as? What can he bring to the Jets?
I think DeBrickashaw Ferguson is a good comp coming out of college anyway. I mean, there's been a lot of DeBrickashaw Ferguson comps coming out of college
Yeah,
aren't
yeah.
DeBrickashaw Ferguson, but that's a good one. I think he can be that. He could be a cornerstone offensive lineman for the next decade. He's got all the tools to do that. He's got the mentality to do that. He will handle New York. He'll be good with the media. He will be a guy who will be steady. And I think that's the way you handle New York. You just be consistent with it. You know, that's what they do in baseball. That's what the good football players do. So I think all of that will be important for him. But you know, you never know. But he's as steady a guy as I put him right up there. I thought Saquon would have a really good NFL career no matter where he went, not only because of his athleticism, but because of his mentality. Same with Micah Parsons, athleticism through the roof. Mentality was right, though. And it is with Olu, too. I put those three guys in the last 10 years as Penn State prospects, I think are can't miss guys. And I agree with you. You to win, you could have Aaron Rodgers all you want. If you can't protect him, it doesn't. Right. It doesn't mean anything. And you know, who was the last team that had a great offensive line that didn't play well? Who's the last losing team with a great offensive line? They don't exist. So you have to get those kind of guys in and roll the dice on them. I love that pick way more than Bowers. And I like Bowers, but I didn't like Bowers much more than the fourth or fifth tight end that was available. I don't like him better than the guy that Penn State had that got picked in the fourth round or the fifth round or whenever he got picked. So definitely a better player, but not to me a big difference making first round guy. I think Olu is a big difference making first round guy.
So Donnie, thanks so much for hanging out with me today. If people want to follow you, where can they do that?
You can follow my football stuff at Penn State TT on X and at Donnie Collins TT on X as well. That's for my baseball stuff. I have two different accounts, but you know, the times-tribune.com. If you want to read some of my stories, I think we have a pretty good deal now on subscriptions. You can read some of the stuff I have on Penn State, on the Yankees, anything like that.
Awesome. All right, guys. Remember, our podcast is sponsored by SeatGeek. Use code JetCast at checkout and you get $20 off your first purchase. Donnie, again, thank you. And as always, go Jets.